Before we start today, actually, speaking of having something, is anybody moving? No. You'll hear in a moment, Taylor will introduce our speaker, but I'm wondering if anybody knows where our speaker is currently working. Yeah. That's fine. Then my next question is, what does TED stand for? Anybody? Technology? Engineering and design? Ooh, are you an engineer? No. But close. Anybody else? What does TED stand for? The E is not engineering. Yeah. You think it would be, right? No. Anybody else? Anybody want to take another E-guess? And here, this is for, let's see if I can, oh, that's my throwing, not very good. Hold on, hold on. Let me give you one more. Yeah, you know I can't get that far back. Anybody want to take another guess? What the E is? Yeah, who was that? There you go. Oh, God. You all, can you go like do the 1, 2? No, you're not. You're supposed to catch it, not like, deflect it. All right. Thank you. So technology, entertainment, design. That's what we're in for this evening. Taylor's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Just one quick announcement before we start. If you email me for any questions, please put in the subtitle Engine 183A to make sure that I see your email. I know a few of you have emailed me, and I am getting to those, but just to make sure that I don't miss any of them, please put that Engine 183A in the subject line. Thank you.
Alrighty. Hi, friends. My name is Taylor, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a senior, double majoring in political economy and interdisciplinary studies. I'm researching semiconductors for my interdisciplinary studies thesis, and I also have my certificate of entrepreneurship through SCET, and now work as a course coordinator, much like Ryan, for the patent law class that SCET puts on. So if any of y'all are interested in that next semester, chat with me. Or honestly, if any of y'all are interested, period, I'd love to meet people in my SCET classes because they're all really interesting and I've yet to be bored by one of the coast conversations. So now that my shameless bid for new friends is over, I have the privilege and honor to introduce Lisa Choi Owens, who is not only a former Bear, but also a senior advisor at TED. So something that stood out to me as I was kind of reading through her LinkedIn, reading articles, listening to interviews for this introduction was that her career has been far from linear. So not on paper, perfection. I mean, not only did she graduate from Howell with a degree in economics, but she also went to Harvard Business School. So those of you who haven't heard of it, small school in Boston. But what impressed me is not only are her academic accolades impressive, but her career and the trajectory it's taken is equally, if not more so, impressive. So she's really worked in essentially every industry, from finance to fashion to wireless, wireless communication systems, yes, to television network distribution, to her current role at TED, and essentially everything in between. And when I was trying to see what the connection is, at a glance, it seems like all these industries aren't connected and the roles are really different from one another. But after listening to her interviews, talking about her career, there really is one true connection between all of them, and it's that she has a knack for identifying opportunities where she'll be able to grow and be central to a business's growth and operations and be able to really create the expansive skill set that has now allowed her to break into any industry she wants and be a huge contributor. So with that being said, give it up for our speaker, and I hope you all enjoy. I know I'm going to.
Hello. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. It's been 30 years since I graduated from Cal. It's been 20 years since I've been on this campus. A lot of you guys weren't even born yet, so I know that's crazy and makes me feel really old. But I am thrilled to be here. It's an honor to come back to Berkeley in this way, and I hope that I teach you something or that you learn something valuable from what it is that I have to share, my long and very storied career. So, there we go. Just to give you a sense of what it is that I'm going to be covering today, we're going to talk about my career, but more importantly, we're going to talk about my story. And then I want to leave you with some advice on how it is that you ought to be living and then telling your own story. Because ultimately, that's one of the most important things and one of the most important skills that you're going to walk away from school and with every experience that you have. It's how you sell yourself, how you tell a story. Because it's infinitely more interesting than bullet points or a resume on a piece of paper. Or digital, I guess. I don't know. People don't print out their resumes anymore, do they? And then at the very end, I'm just going to give a little dessert, a little cherry on top, because everybody asks me, how do you give a good TED Talk? And it's probably everyone's burning question, and so I'll leave you with just some of those tidbits in case many of you, I'm sure, have a TED Talk inside of you. So, my career. I don't know if this visual looks familiar. My very dear friend, Matthew Carlson, I give full design credit. I stole this from him. Rather, he gave me the template to share my career trajectory. And if it looks a little bit like chaos theory, that's exactly by design. I'm not going to bore you with the bullet points and the exact chronology of how everything happened, but I want you to just almost blur your eyes and be like, oh my God, it's all over the map. And what I want you to take away from that is that you need to give yourself some grace. Nobody, and I mean nobody, comes out of school and has a straight line in their future. And I think even more so, there's so much unpredictability and so much change, you have to just make sure that you're open to those changes. And so, on many levels, you could look at this and go, God, what a wild failure. This woman couldn't figure out what the hell she wanted to do. Or you could look at it as, what a storied past. What an interesting way to get through life, and how many lessons did she learn and people did she meet along the way? So you really have to make sure that you have patience with yourself and to just make sure that there is no such thing as a straight line. I know that there are certain degrees, maybe in medicine, and there are probably a few exceptions here or there, but you have to remain open and you have to give yourself grace to know that if anyone tells you that they knew all along where they were going to be, they're lying to you. So what I thought was a more interesting way of talking about my career was actually to talk about the transitions. Because if you were to just look on my resume and take a look at all of the different industries and the different companies that I've worked at, you would probably be confused. And the reason that I want to give you the transitions is because those are the moments where you are going to be challenged. When you graduate from school, when you quit your first job, when you think about applying to business school, when you think about launching a new business and writing a business plan, when you decide to switch careers, when you switch industries, these are the moments that are the most challenging to you. Because if I'm being honest, the tactical work of the job is the easiest part. The politics and the ability to understand how to transition seamlessly from one to the next, when to take a risk, when to understand that you don't have quite enough information to make that decision, how to understand when you feel safe to do so, those are the moments where you're going to have your most growth. And it's also going to be the most uncomfortable. But as I was thinking about these different transitions, I started to notice that there were some themes. And I color-coded it just to make it a little easier for you guys. So I'm going to start my journey. And it's a wild ride, one that I never would have expected. But I'm first going to start by giving you a little bit of my background so you know where I came from before, because I had a life before I ended up starting my first job. So my parents are Korean immigrants. They came to the United States with $800 in their pocket. They didn't speak any English. They didn't go to college. So this is truly the American dream in real life. I grew up I was born in Chicago. I moved 10 times before I was 10 years old, and then I made my way to Redondo Beach. I was there until I came to Cal, and I had the fortune of coming to Berkeley. One of the reasons my parents wanted me to come here was because my first semester was $800. I'm guessing that's not how much you guys are paying in tuition right now. My last semester was $1,600. So the greatest gift of my life was the ability to have this quality of education, and the fact that my parents, who were dry cleaners, had the ability to afford this to me, and my sister, who's also a Cal Bear. So that's my background, and I'm sure many of you will relate, because everyone comes from all different backdrops. I didn't know people, I just studied hard. My parents locked me in my room. I was forced to take SAT classes, and the whole 9 yards, a very kind of Asian parent way of doing things. But I'm thankful because I made my way here. And so when I graduated from Cal, one of the things that I realized when I was leaving was, because of my background, I actually didn't have a financial safety net. So truly, necessity is what drove my first decision, which was, what job pays the most? And you're often going to be put in those positions. You can't be upset by it, but you just have to understand the circumstance that you're in. My real dream was to be a newscaster. And then I started to look at different programs, and then I started to look at the median income of a person that graduates from college to go into journalism, and I thought, that's not an option. I'm going to close that door for now. So I got recruited by another Cal alum. Banks, some of the investment banks were kind of coming onto campus. I was an economics major, which I thought was a really kind of just an easy generalist major, so that I could look at all kinds of different types of jobs. And back then, it was banks on Wall Street and management consulting firms. So they came on campus, I interviewed, and I thought it was the most exciting thing in the world that I got to interview. And they flew me across the country, and I got to go to New York. And I was excited by that. And I had absolutely no idea what these jobs were. So I basically went through all of Wall Street. I interviewed all of the banks, and there was one program. It was called the Global Markets Training Program at JP Morgan, and it was sales and trading. And this is how ignorant I was. I thought, oh, sales. I have kind of a fun, salesy personality. This was going to be great for me. It turned out it was in fixed income and foreign exchange. My first client was Tiger Hedge Fund. I had 5 screens in front of me. I didn't know finance. I didn't like math. I'm not entirely sure why I made this decision, but it did pay the most. And so, needless to say, maybe not the right choice. I also realized at that time that this was going to be a pretty narrow scope. So I'm on a trading floor. I'm up at 4 a.m. It was brutal. I was telling folks at dinner, most of the people I worked with would have been fired for the behavior that I had to withstand while I was working on a trading floor as a woman in the early 90s. But I lasted for 18 months, and I really quickly realized this is absolutely not for me. And it's devastating because, you have this incredible run. You go to UC Berkeley, you're so proud. You get all of these offers from these investment banks, and you realize, I absolutely chose the wrong career. I cried in the bathroom almost every day, always in private. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. It was an absolutely brutal environment, and it really didn't suit at all my interests or the things that I was best at. So, what did I do? I networked. I was friends with people, and we were all of the same ilk. Everyone's down partying, everyone's on Wall Street, everyone's working late hours, and it turned out that one of my friends worked at Lehman Brothers, which is now defunct. I don't know if you guys even know the Lehman Brothers existed. They took Tommy Hilfiger public, and a bunch of the people that went through that IPO process ended up going to Tommy Hilfiger. Now, it's a weird transition that I've always had to describe, but when you give people that context, it kind of makes sense. There were people that were analysts, there were people that were analytical, and I moved into an analytical role at Tommy Hilfiger. And it was an incredibly different experience, but one that turned out to be advantageous to me when I decided to apply to business school. It was one of the few experiences, and I don't know how many of you, particularly in the US economy that's so service-oriented, where I learned how to make and sell a product. So the actual process of planning, making somewhere in Asia, and distributing on a floor and selling a physical good. And it turned out that that was actually pretty distinct, because most of the people that were applying to business school had come actually from management consulting and from investment banks. So what did I do at that point? I bet on myself. And it's amazing to me the hubris that I had. I had literally 1 year in sales and trading and fixed income and foreign exchange, and 1 year in fashion. And I'm like, yes, I'm ready to go to Harvard Business School. I'm ready. It's good to have that kind of confidence. I worked like an animal. For 6 months, I stayed at work until midnight every night. I applied to 6 schools. Obviously, I got into HBS. This was my #1 choice, and I went. And what can I say? I called my dad, he cried. This is one of these moments where it's like the American dream. You just can't even imagine what it feels like to watch your parents see this level of success. And so I went, and needless to say, it was challenging, it was interesting, it was fun. I networked like hell, and I got to learn a lot of things that I would only later in life learn to appreciate. But at the time, when I graduated, it was 1999. 1999 was the internet bubble, which I know seems odd now because it's part of your DNA, but at the time, it was the thing. There was nothing else. People were blinded by the idea of going to startups. And so while I took the safe route and I had internships at BCG and at Kraft Foods, because consumer packaged goods and marketing is another kind of standard place where people go professionally, I ended up deciding I have to seize the moment, because what am I going to do? This is it. This is it. The internet, baby. Everybody's going. And so I went, and it was an incredible opportunity. I ended up working at thenot.com, which is a wedding portal, and we IPO'd. And it was such a distinct honor to be able to go through a public offering, to go through an IPO process. If you get to go through it, you know, you should consider yourself lucky. December 99, parties, 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 going public. March 2000. The bubble burst. It was so tragic. By June, the Knot was delisted from the NASDAQ. So it was a really short party. And it was tragic and very ill-timed. There was a moment where I thought that I had a lot of money, and then all of a sudden I didn't have any money. And so what did I do? I got married. No, I'm kidding. I actually did get married. I did happen to be engaged while I worked in the Knot, and I did happen to get married. But it turned out that my husband had a real job that made money and was not part of the internet bubble. So I had no choice. So what did I do? I went from there and I said, well, I guess I have to move to DC because that's where he is, and that's where we have his income. And DC, if you're not familiar, it's not the world's most consumer brand friendly environment. It's very telecom corridor, there's government contracting, or it's politics. And I couldn't find another equivalent to these kind of consumer brands that I was already really attracted to. But what I did do is I said, you know what, I do have digital-ish. I did some tech. And so I parlayed that into a wireless software company. And I worked at Aether Systems. And this was a telecom bubble as well. We ended up being valued at $1.2 billion. And I had no idea what product marketing was. I had never worked with engineers. And in fact, one of the people that interviewed me, it was so lovely. She goes, you know, marketing software is really different than marketing sweaters. And I was like, yeah, I got it. Thanks. Thanks, friend. But I had an amazing boss, and I learned the ropes. I launched an enterprise application integration software platform that integrated CRMs and SFAs and different types of enterprise applications to mobile phones, which was novel at that time. And I learned that building a brand is not that different in different places, and understanding what a consumer wants and translating that into requirements isn't that different than finding the measurements of t-shirts and pants and sweaters. You just have to understand who your customer is and what is it that they want, and then translate that into the person that's gonna make it, in the same way that we did when we went to the factories in Hong Kong. And so I was actually able to start to thread together, like there are actually things that I can learn from these different experiences that are relevant to one another, and I didn't realize it at the time. So I was there for a couple of years. It was really an incredibly important moment for me to understand what product marketing and product management were, and this idea of translating requirements into actual business requirements and technical requirements, and having that relationship back and forth with the engineering team, because it would come to serve me later in a way that I had never thought. And so while I was not a technologist, and this was not my favorite job, and it was not my favorite city, it ended up being invaluable to me later. So eventually I moved on because the telecom bubble burst and I lost my job. One of many. So this is now 2 bubbles that I've survived. And I start looking for jobs and I decide I want to be back in New York City. I want to be in New York. And what did I do? I tried something new, and I also networked like hell. I interviewed at probably 100 different places, and I interviewed with everyone and every brand and every company, and I blanketed every alumni that I knew. I did everything that I possibly could. And I landed at Fuse Networks, so Fuse Music Television. I don't know if you're familiar. It's the baby stepchild of MTV. It's owned actually by AMC Networks, and it was in music television. And it turned out that my technology background would be valuable here. I ended up doing business development. I did all kinds of digital distribution deals all over the world, sending our content out into mobile phones in Japan and in Europe. I did the first interactive TV application that we launched in television with something called short codes, which I'm sure none of you are familiar with. This was novel at the time. And the other thing that I did is I actually negotiated digital rights with the music labels, which was the worst job that anyone could ever ask anyone to do. But boy, did it teach me. In uncertainty, I had absolutely no idea what I was fighting for. Rights for what? For which platform? For what duration? I had no idea. For what form of consumption? I had no idea. But these all, like I said, all of these things are going to feed into experiences that I have in the future. So I did that. It was a great experience, and I started to network, and I was going to HBS alumni events as well. And I ended up networking with somebody, and I met a woman who would eventually become my boss. I was 8 months pregnant with my first child, and it was pretty obvious that she wasn't going to hire me at that time. And so we stayed in touch, and I had impressed something upon her. And a year later, she calls me and says, "Lisa, I have a job for you." So I ended up going to Scripps Networks, which owns Food Network, HGTV, and Travel Channel, which I presume you guys are somewhat familiar with. And what was interesting about it is I did the same thing. I did business development. I did digital deals. I had to just figure out new revenue streams using these different platforms, et cetera. And I worked for her, and I loved her. I thought I could work for you forever. And then a week later, she quit. These are all the things that you cannot anticipate. And I cried, and it was tragedy. Until the president of the network heard me speak at an event. I was presenting to the sales team, and he decided, I'm going to promote you into her job. So I went from having 4 people working for me doing digital business development to 220 people overnight. I was the youngest person on the executive committee by 20 years. I had 100 engineers working for me down in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I can tell you right now, I was absolutely not ready. I was not ready. I took the job. There was no way that I was going to turn it down, but I wasn't ready for it. And this is one of the many things that I'm going to try to impart onto you about how leadership does take time. Now, because I had no choice, I figured it out. And this was the most aggressive form of education that I've ever had to learn. I had to speak the language of the engineers. I had product management. I had design. I had every functional area. I was responsible for 10 websites, 8 different mobile apps, all kinds of over-the-top and streaming service apps. Was managing, I can't even, it was just an endless stream of break, fix, and platform consolidation projects, and all the while, I was the only digital expert on the executive team and the youngest person by 20 years. I was a New York person trying to fit into a Knoxville culture. It was one of the most challenging experiences in my life, and for the first year, it was hell. But over time, what my last boss told me was, a conductor doesn't know how to play every instrument in an orchestra. You don't need to know every single instrument. You don't need to know every single function tactically. But you do have to have an understanding of how they relate to each other, and you need to find a lieutenant in each of these who you trust. And that's an incredibly important thing to think about, because when you are mired in technical classes, and whether it's financial analysis or whether it's a hardcore engineering class that I'm sure you guys are all in, you think that that particular set of knowledge, that tactical, practical knowledge, is going to be the hardest and most difficult thing and the most important thing. But it turns out that it's not. You do have to be proficient. Don't get me wrong. You have to be proficient. But it turns out that you can lead and manage, and you can learn other people's functional areas of expertise with more experience, and you actually have the capacity to lead. And so I was able to do that. And through that, I got experience reporting into the board of directors. We're a public company. We're 2,000 people strong. I was down in Knoxville, Tennessee, literally 2 weeks of every month. I had 2 young children. I didn't think it was possible. Knoxville, Tennessee, not my favorite city. I don't want to offend anyone if anyone here is from Knoxville, Tennessee. But it also taught me about the differences in cultures. When you work at companies now, are you remote? Is the main office in London? Are you at a satellite? These are all lessons that were slowly kind of seeping into my system. And one of the things that I got to do was I was out learning about digital. This was the first time I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, for 9 years in a row. And I remember when I went, the first time they had a connected TV. I know you can't imagine buying a TV that is not connected, but at that time, you paid for cable, and then you had the internet. These were entirely different things. And I came back and I thought, oh shit, there goes our business model. We get paid to send television through a cable box. What if people can get it on the internet for free? I came back, my hair was on fire. I went to the board, I went to the management team. I'm like, guys, this is gonna destroy us. And everyone's like, whatever, it's fine, we don't care. And eventually, I kept at it, drumbeat, 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 pushing. I'm like, guys, this is important. And all of the years of experience that I had before gave me the capacity to see beyond just television, network, digital deals, digital websites, so that I can see the broader picture. And this is one of the great things that I learned at Harvard Business School as well. And so that allowed me to actually have some vision into the future and say, I can tell that this is something that's going to be very important. And eventually, we ended up having a presence at CES, and I was every quarter invited to report to the board. I became the person that was telling them what was going on in technology. So it was probably the steepest growth curve that I've ever been through, and absolutely the most uncomfortable, but maybe the most important professional experience that I had. And what it did also is it gave me a tremendous amount of confidence. So I went in feeling weak-kneed and insecure, and by the end, I actually knew what I was doing. So at that point, I had an idea for a business based on a deal that I had done 3 years before. And I ended up partnering with our head of ad sales, and we launched a new brand. We went to the board, wrote a business plan, had never done that before, and we got funded. We actually bought a video player platform here in San Francisco, and we launched an entirely new brand called YouLive. And so that was a moment where I bet on myself again. I realized I have enough experience, I know everything that there is to know about digital distribution. We're gonna start a new brand. I mean, where does this confidence come from? I mean, honestly, I think as the years go by, maybe I have slightly less confidence because I know what I don't know what I don't know. But it was another incredible learning experience. I took from an old deal that I had done, I leveraged the relationships that I had with the sales team, with the board. I was able to get in front of them, get millions and millions of dollars worth of funding to be effectively an entrepreneur. We launched YouLive. It was a digital distribution network, and we basically blasted out all of our television quality content, a sales team and a video player that tracked the ads. We got 125 partners, and we grew to almost 1 billion streams in a year. So we did that for a couple of years. It was so successful that they wrapped it back into the mothership. And at that point, I realized I kind of like being my own boss. So I was a COO of that because I was a co-founder of it. And by then, I will tell you, I was pretty burned out on corporate. So I'd been in big organizations, I'd been through the startups, I'd been through the tech world, and I thought, I don't know that I can do this. And 2 incomes, 2 working parents, mother of 2 young children, flying around the world, going down and spending half my time in Knoxville. It was exhausting. And I just thought, I don't know that this is motivating me anymore. I don't know that this is what I want to continue to do, and I didn't want to go back into the mothership. So I was burned out. And I thought, well, what can I do? How am I going to, what's next? Which is why I laugh when we talked about it at dinner. I'm still figuring it out. This was like Act 1, Act 2. I think I'm on Act 3, I'm not sure, maybe Act 4. But at that time, I really had no idea what I was going to do next. So I did what most people would do, and I went into the Amazon jungle. So I networked like hell throughout. You'll see that I was constantly networking. I'm a total nerd. I love all forms of leadership camps. I love all group activities. And I like being with total strangers. So I did a bunch of these types of things, and I met all kinds of interesting people. And I met the founders of a beautiful organization called the Pachamama Alliance, which is working to preserve the sacred headwaters of the Amazon in Ecuador. And rather than going to a spa and getting massages or going to a yoga retreat, I thought, I need to do something entirely different. I need to get out of my comfort zone. And I have to see what else is out there. Because if I stay in this lane, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm really literally burned out. So I went, and I spoke to everyone there. They were total strangers to me, and they asked me what I did. And the interesting thing at that point was, by this time, probably 40, I kind of thought I was really worldly. I kind of thought I knew everything. I'm like, hey, you know what? I've lived in New York City. I went to Berkeley. I went to Harvard Business School. I've been a COO. I've done all these things. I'm pretty worldly. I feel like I know the world. And what I didn't realize was I had blinders on. I absolutely had a lane. And I was looking only at companies that were similarly situated to me. NBC Universal, Comcast, The Economist. I was looking at things that were very similar. And then these people, these strangers, listening to what I had to say. Oh, what did you do? I've never heard of that before. You should work at TED. And if I tell you that my lane I thought was wide, TED was all the way over here. It was entirely out of my line of sight. But it was a really big moment for me. It taught me that if I hadn't gone out of my comfort zone, and if someone had not introduced me to something that I didn't know, TED was never going to be in my future. And I also went into that trip. I went into the analysis of all the companies I wanted to look at, and I was certain that my lens was wide. And it wasn't. And this is by the time I'm 40, and I've traveled to 50 countries around. I've done lots and lots of things, and even still, it was a very humbling moment, and it's something to think about in your life. You don't know what you don't know. And the more experiences you have and the more people that you network with, the more opportunities that you will see that you yourself may not have been able to find. And so with that, needless to say, serendipity. The woman that started Pachamama, her goddaughter is a recruiter who found out about a job at TED, and all of the stars aligned. And that was my Act 3. That was when I ended up working for a nonprofit, because at that point I realized I actually want to do something with purpose. It also turns out that TED is mostly online video, right? And so it's actually weirdly totally relevant to my background, but it had purpose. And I was describing to folks at dinner one of the greatest gifts of TED is that I got to learn freely. No exams, no tests, no scores, and I got to learn for 8 solid years listening to thousands and thousands of TED Talks. It was a difficult job. I was a chief revenue officer, which seems like an oxymoron at a nonprofit. I was constantly struggling with moral dilemmas. Who do I partner with? Where do I raise money from? Is all money dirty? Can I work with the NFL? Can I work with FIFA? Can I work with Philip Morris? How am I going to fund this organization? And so the problems that I ended up encountering while being there ended up being more complex, but I was more ready. I had had so many different industry experiences. I actually understood how to read people's intention, which ended up being the thing that mattered the most in this job, which is to maintain the integrity of the brand, the fact that we are a nonprofit, making sure we were financially fine, but without having to do deals that people felt uncomfortable with or would put our brand in question. And it was a knife's edge that I walked. But I could never have done that job had I not had all of those other experiences and understood all of the different dynamics in different industries and how to read the room and how to read people's intentions. And so I am now at TED. I'm a senior advisor. I work part-time. I'll be moving on to another role soon that's not public yet, that I'm very excited about. And none of this, it's the most random set of companies that you can possibly imagine. But to me, the transitions, the decision-making, the networking, the seizing the moment, like trying to find the themes of when were the right moments, how to make leaps, those were the ones that were the most challenging, and those were where I had the most growth. And so you should embrace them. When you're ready to quit, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. If you get let go, it's gonna feel terrible, right? When your boss quits, you're gonna cry. You're gonna have all of these moments. The internet bubble's gonna burst. 9/11 is gonna happen. The housing crisis. There are so many things that are gonna come your way, and you just have to be open. And then look at the chaotic mess of my career and feel better about yourself. Because there is a path forward where you actually can have professional success and financial success that doesn't have a straight line and doesn't have a roadmap. So what I want to do is just share a few of the themes, if it's not obvious. Trying new things, duh. Being deeply uncomfortable, deeply, deeply uncomfortable is one of the most important things. It's like, working out. You have to tear down the muscle in order for it to grow back stronger. I firmly believe this to be true. Betting on yourself, what I'm gonna say about this right now, find the right moment. And I know that you have all the confidence in the world, and that's a beautiful thing. But you can't always bet on yourself all the time. You can't take big bets all the time and do the startup and say that you're gonna be a CEO at 22 and at 24 and at 26. There are moments where you're gonna wanna take advantage of that. Take stock. Who's in your corner? These are the things that you want to think about when you're betting on yourself. Seizing the moment, obviously there are going to be moments where it's like, I don't have time to analyze. The shit's happening now. It's going down now. I'm just going to go. Sometimes you have to just go with your gut and just say, this is the moment. I wasn't planning on it, but oh shit, there's an opportunity, I'm going to take it. And then last but not least, and it's so obvious, network like there's no tomorrow. You have no idea who you're gonna need, who's gonna be important to you, who you're gonna need to call. I have no idea. I've never run an engineering group before. Who can I call? Who can I trust? Don't burn bridges. Be friends with people. Network like a crazy person. I promise you this is gonna be one of the most important skills that you're ever gonna have in your life. And then there are all the things that I didn't do. These are my shoulda, woulda, couldas. When I started at JP Morgan, I had no idea what I was doing. I had 5 screens in front of my face, and I was like, you want forward points on the Irish punt? Okay. I was staring into space. I had no clue. And at some point, I couldn't ask how to do it anymore. It was too embarrassing. Too many months had gone by. And then I was asked to have more responsibility. Oh, whoops, I skipped a step. If you don't invest in building the foundation, you do have to be proficient in certain things before you move on to the next. It will come back and bite you. Self-reflection. Bad at math, don't know finance. Why did I take a job on Wall Street? It speaks for itself. You don't need to be perfect, and this has a lot to do with the conductor and orchestra thing. You don't need to know something fully to lead it. You don't need to know something fully to write a business plan about it. You just have to know enough, know who's in your corner, what resources do you have, is the timing right, etc. And every opportunity you ever have in your life, public speak. Every time you have an opportunity to present, raise your hand and do it. The stakes are low now, and they just get higher. But I'm telling you, the more you speak publicly, the easier it gets. It is number 2 only to the fear of heights, to a thing that people are so afraid of, and that's public speaking. So anytime anyone asks you, raise your hand and get out there and be uncomfortable when the stakes are low, and you're going to be able to build that muscle to be better at it in the future, because I promise you, verbalizing what you need, what direction the company needs to go in, what your strengths are, ends up being rewarded. You want to do it well. And then lastly, leadership is earned. And I don't mean to say this like, oh, you can't be a leader when you're really, really young. But I'm telling you, I knew when I wasn't ready, and I knew when I was ready. And I saw that the sum of the parts made me a better leader. And so while there may be impatience and you need to be a CEO in your early 20s, I just want you to think for a moment that leadership and wisdom isn't something you can speed up. And that there's a reason why a lot of times people are a bit older by the time they get to these jobs. And I've really learned to appreciate how hard it is to be a CEO, how hard it is to be a COO, and how much time it took for me to learn it. And I wish I hadn't been thrown into the circumstance that I was when my boss quit. I made it through, but it was painful. So I wanted to share some things that I've learned while I was at TED that I actually think are super relevant to your career story and the path and the story that you're going to tell about yourself. And while I learned about 1,000 things and everything is interesting and everything is related and I was just a TED nerd, there were a few things in particular that I think will be very interesting for you to think about as you navigate your career. The first is to open your aperture. This has a lot to do with the experience I had when I went into the Amazon jungle. I thought my life had a wide-angle lens attached to it, and it turns out it didn't. And so if you are in engineering, learn poetry. If you're a math major, learn something about civics. If you only hang out with people who are in your lane, who are only interested in the things that you're interested in, you are going to have a very narrow lane. You are not going to have a wide-angle lens on your life. And I really think that not only is it good for your career to have this broad exposure, it just makes for a more interesting life. The other thing that I learned while I was at TED, and I'm going to give you 2 examples, is that the more that you experience and the more opportunities you see, you saw that I had little threads. I saw threads and relationships between things. And this really rang true for me at TED, because TED is a celebration of the full spectrum of human ingenuity. And the way that we program our conferences is we pull talks together that seemingly are disparate, but it turns out there's a relationship. And when you can see relationships between things that are not obvious, often lies the most creative solution and the best part of the story. So can anyone even imagine what the relationship is between Apple and the Ritz-Carlton? Don't worry, you don't have to answer. I'm not going to make you raise your hands. Apple, when they wanted to create a retail store, people were like, that's stupid. Don't do that. But what did they do? Most people would have gone out and done competitive research. So they would have gone to like Sam Goody. You probably, does that even exist? Does everyone know what that is? Best Buy. You guys know what Best Buy is. So most people would have said, hey, it's a retailer. They're selling electronics. Let me go and see what everybody else is doing. Instead, the store planners at Apple went to the Ritz-Carlton and learned about their concierge service. And it's through this that they have created a differentiable, deeply competitive situation with their peers by having a completely different angle on how it was they were going to approach retail. And I would say that nobody has come even close to the experience that people have at Apple, not because they followed the pack, but because they took a completely different view. Another great example, this is a speaker, Anirudh Sharma. He lived in India, and as many of you may know, there's quite a big pollution problem, and it often leaves a film of black. And it's a devastating way to live. It's wasteful. But there was something about it. He had an epiphany moment where he looked at the black as he was writing, and he thought, well, ink is black. I wonder if there's a way that I can transform pollution into ink. I wonder if I can transform something that's actually devastating to the environment and use it as a tool for creativity. And so he actually ended up creating a technology that took pollution from the air and created ink from it. Ink for all different types of purposes. And I give you those two examples because these are people that really spent time thinking about the not obvious, the things that are not obvious, right? They were able to be thoughtful in their solutions. They were creative thinkers. And this is one of the things that I've really spent a lot of time thinking about at TED, because I have learned this art over the 8 years and the 10,000 talks that I've listened to. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then the last thing I wanted to say, the third most important thing that I learned at TED was that in a world right now where everything is headline only, and I do it, I scroll through the news and then I pretend like I know a topic. Someone asks me something, I'm like, I just read the headline, sorry. You didn't pay attention to the detail. There are moments where you really probably want to pay attention to detail. And so this is a front page of the New York Times in 1973. And it's a pretty boring front page. It talks about Nixon and college students and debt and insurance. Kind of typical New York Times front page. On page 57, there was an article about Motorola and wireless phones. Which do you think is the bigger story? Insurance and Nixon winning some vote in the Senate, or the fact that wireless cell phones were on their way? So in a world where you want to have a cursory look at everything and have the cliff notes of everything, one way that you can have an advantage over others is by actually paying attention to other details that people do not, because there will be value somewhere. So, your story. All of this is to tell you, I think I have an interesting story. It's crazy, it's circuitous, it looks a bit chaotic, but I've lived a pretty full life, and I have many more acts to go. But a lot of it has to do with the way that you tell your story, right? Because I'm telling you, if you're able to share it in a story form that makes you care. They say, what is the essence of a good TED Talk? It's not that you know that I care, it's that I made you care. And so storytelling is one of the most important things that you can learn. And I want you to just make sure that you have a varied experience, try to take in some of the things that I've learned. But lastly, how also to publicly speak and tell your story in a way that gives people confidence in you. And so this, like I said, is the most popular thing people ask me for. So I'm just going to give you some of the basics of what makes a good TED Talk, which I think just is what makes a good talk. What is a good way of public speaking? And so these are some of the basics. ABC, audience before content. A lot of times, what you want to do is go, hey, I'm an expert in this. I'm going to write 47 pages in Keynote, and I'm going to bore the shit out of everyone talking about all the stuff that I did in my thesis. If your audience is a group of senior executives or CEOs, do you think they want to see tons of data? If you have an audience of toddlers, do you have lots of big words on the screen? You have to care about what the audience wants to hear before you put your own interest in the topic first. This is the number one thing that we tell people at TED. Audience before content. You will always have a moment to be able to showcase all of your wares, but who cares if your audience doesn't care? When you're presenting, try to pick 1 or 2 ideas at most, not 12. By the way, this is also a moment where you say, an idea is very different than a story and an opinion. You can tell a story about an experience you've had. That's not an idea. You have to actually be really careful in thinking about what's distinct about this idea. And the more ideas you throw out, the less people will listen. And what matters most? Did you give this presentation for yourself? You gave it for the people that are listening to you. How are they going to listen to you if you tell them 37 things? It's too difficult to do. Again, you can't only care about the information you want to share. You have to do it in a way that's consumable and digestible that people will remember. Why you? So the first thing I did is I sat up here, I was introduced. You know, I went to Berkeley, I went to Harvard Business School, I had all these jobs, and I was in the C-suite and all that kind of stuff. Establish yourself as the right person for telling the story. Why are you the expert? Are you the author of that topic? Do you teach that subject at a school? Have you had that job for 10 years? If you establish that off the bat, people will already listen more intently. Make it personal. So by telling you a little bit of the backdrop, a little bit of the story, it means I have an emotional connection to something. And the truth of the matter is feelings matter. People feel. People remember feelings. And so if you are too clinical and you don't have any humanity baked into what it is that you're talking about, people won't listen. It's less interesting. You are not as memorable as a public speaker. And provide a solution. So you can't just rant on and on about a problem, and this is a problem, and that's a problem. Here's a stat on why this is a problem, that's a problem. No TED speaker makes it onto the stage unless there is a solution. And I'm telling you, forget the TED audience, your boss will be thrilled that at the end of every presentation, you have a solution. Your professors will be thrilled. Close the loop, give it some thought, and have some kind of a suggestion at the end that makes people feel sated, right? You can't just rant on and on about a problem. You have to offer something to people. And like I said, there's no TED Talk that makes it onto the stage unless there's a solution. And a couple really boring things, but as you saw, don't put a lot of words. Don't use a bunch of jargon. Simple, plain English, bleeding images. People still, and I know that people try to argue with me, we don't parallel process. I can't read and listen to you at the same time, right? So you want things that are additive and a sidecar to your story, but if you put 13, 15, 20 bullets and 4 graphs, people aren't listening to what you're saying. And if you use jargon and words that people don't understand, people don't want to listen to you either. And then this is the worst. Everyone hates it. Memorize. Our speakers work anywhere from 3 to 6 months, writing, editing, and memorizing their talks. That's why they look so perfect on the stage. And I'm telling you right now, if I was doing this to you guys, I said, I think it's really important that when you have a job and you talk to your boss, will they listen to you when you're looking down or when you're talking to them and you're making eye contact? These are really, really important things. They're not necessarily things that you're taught in school, but it matters. The ability to relate to someone and have them care about what you're saying and for them to learn to care about what you're talking about. So, thank you for listening to my TED Talk. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
And the beginning of your answering questions.
Q&A. I think we're going to move these in closer, right? Oops, and I don't want to lose those. I'm sorry. Thank you for my beautiful flowers. Water? Yes, please.
Okay. So, I mean, I've said this before, but for over a decade, I've been listening to different speakers. And mark my words, this will be the single most important talk you have ever heard for your future. And I know you were talking about like giving TED Talks or giving speeches, but that's exactly what you think about as you're starting to interview, or if you're interviewing to go to graduate school, or if you're interviewing for a new job. So if you can remember just 1 or 2 of the things that Lisa highlighted, take that with you. Here's the other thing. I'm a big believer in edges. People who are too round aren't that interesting. And Lisa's given us all sorts of edges to grasp onto. So instead of me asking questions with all those edges, I would like you all to start to ask questions. We have half an hour, I think. So yeah, go ahead. And can I just ask if you would just say maybe your first name and what you're studying?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Gabe. I'm a media studies major. So you said your first job, you decided to finance first.
That's a fair question. I'm glad that I totally contradicted an earlier speaker. I didn't mean to do that. And obviously, in the ideal world, you'll do what you love, right? Sometimes there's the paradox of choice. Sometimes it's okay if it's narrowed. And as you saw with me, I wasn't even in the ballpark. It was so far afield from what I ended up doing, and I still was able to course correct. So I would say, first of all, your circumstances are very personal, and the level of importance you put on them is exactly the right level of importance, and that your first job is not the end-all, be-all. It will not define your direction at all. If you can, and it's, again, somehow related to the industry. So as an example, let's say you want to be a photographer. Well, maybe you'll end up having to photograph for an advertising company, for products that you don't enjoy, but you're learning the craft of photography. If you can at least have some tangent to either the industry or the function, that's probably a good decision to make. But like I said, just because you don't make that first right choice, it doesn't mean that you're going to be off course forever. But if you do have an option of choosing something that, like I said, is somehow tangential and one makes more money, that might be the right decision for you. Just don't put too much pressure on yourself.
Here, I have a favorite. You next, but can someone raise their hand in the back row? Anyone? Just for a second, you don't have to ask a question. Just let me see somebody. You in the blue shirt? Or yes, you next to the person in the blue shirt. If you can't hear a question, can you just put a hand up and we'll repeat the question?
Yeah.
Is that a deal?
Okay.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many people have said, Lisa, you should do your own thing. You should start your own thing. I'm like, what? I don't know what it is. I don't have a thing. If I had a thing, I would do the thing. So there's that. But the other thing too, guys, starting your own business and being your own boss means you are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's like having a child. You can never, ever let it go. And so you have to decide what you mean by freedom. What type of freedom? Because there's a loss of freedom in taking that type of job, being responsible for the well-being of your employees, taking full liability and responsibility for the product that you put out there, having to deal with the ups and the downs, having to manage the risk, having issues with cash flow. There is a lot of stress that comes with running your own business. There's a lot of freedom, but it's lonely. And when you're the CEO and you're the one that starts it, you answer to yourself. And it's difficult because everyone else is beholden to you. So then you have to care about the intentions of the people that are working for you. It's not that I'm saying that having your own business and starting your own company and being a CEO isn't a wonderful thing. It is earned. It is an incredibly difficult job. And you know one thing that I've learned, even though I know CEO pay is out of hand, the more senior I have gotten, the more I understand why CEOs get paid a lot. Not to the extent that they are now. That is a challenging, exhausting job. And when it's your own, you better be ready because you will sleep and eat that job. The other thing is for me, because I knew that, and as a woman and as a mother, there were trade-offs that I had to make. And I couldn't be at the beck and call of both my children and this other child called a company. And then lastly, there wasn't a thing that motivated me. I didn't have an idea. If I did, and by the way, I did do that. I got to do it inside of the comfort of a company. I was an entrepreneur, but we did still take risks. And if we failed, it was on me and my partner, Jeff. But I wouldn't say, like with anything, it's a simple answer. I'm really good at making decisions, but I'll tell you this, I've gotten way better as I've gotten older. Because the more experience you have, the more you have the ability to make decisions quickly. I'm gonna give you an example. So business school, you learn 500 cases, and it's designed explicitly to give you too many cases for the amount of hours in the day. Every case has not enough information or too much information or the wrong information. And what it is doing is training you for the real world, which is exactly that. You're not gonna have enough time, you're gonna have the wrong information, you're gonna have too much information, you're gonna have too little information. And so I think part of it is put yourself in position to make decisions. So as an example, if you stay at a job for 15 years, do you think you are absolutely stretching yourself? Have you put yourself in a position to be uncomfortable and to question why it is that you're doing these things? So I think that making sure that you keep open to opportunities to make decisions, albeit them small, the more familiar you'll get with it. And I think the other thing too, and this is something that I've now learned and I've mastered, I have friends of all different ages. I have peer groups, professional groups, and friends that are both older and younger. And I actually find it incredibly helpful to have a team of people around you that have different experiences. And I also think it's important to have friends that are not just your peers and exactly your age, people who are older, people who are younger, to give you perspective. So I think those are all things. None of these things are ever going to be a black and white answer. But I do think the more opportunities you have. So if you are at a club and you want to be a leader of the club, when you're the leader of the club, you make decisions. You start flexing that muscle of decision making. When you get to the first company and they say, hey, do you want to help with the holiday party? I'll do it. You're making decisions. What's the culture like? What's the right place? The more that you do things, the more comfortable you become. And then you get to this age, and what I get paid for is making decisions. Networking is awkward. I'm not going to lie to you. And even me, if it's not obvious, I'm an extrovert. Even for me, it can be uncomfortable. And there are many circumstances, and particularly as a woman in tech and a woman in finance, that it was deeply uncomfortable because no one looked like me that I was trying to network with. Unfortunately, you have to put yourself in the position and stand there awkwardly and sweat and be like, why am I here? And lament and struggle and do that more frequently. And then you talk to one person. And just having that one conversation gets the juices flowing. You start to feel a little bit more comfortable. And I think the other thing that's really important to do is try to find some personal connection. Don't just say, hi, how do I get a job at your company? If they talk about something and they love cars, and you say, oh my God, I love cars, find some nugget as a human being to connect with that person, and it will become easier. But I'm not gonna lie to you, networking is uncomfortable. But again, the more that you practice, the more you put yourself in the position, and the more you sit with being uncomfortable. I have been in situations, believe it or not, even recently, where I'm like, God, why am I here? I feel so uncomfortable, this sucks. I talk to one person, I have one nice little conversation, and it opens me up. And I feel a little bit more comfortable. People see me talking to somebody, two people, someone wants to come and talk to a third. It's just a little bit of a dance, and you just have to do it as frequently as you can. But in as much as you can be a human being and relate to someone on a personal level, albeit the smallest thing, whether it's the appetizer or the room that you're in or the weather, it's a lovely way to start. It is the most intimidating thing on the planet, and because I've worked there and I've seen how the sausage is made, it scares the living daylights out of me. That being said, I have a list of probably 15 things that I would give a TED Talk about. And every year I'm like, oh, I should give a TED Talk on that. If I'm being honest, I have so much respect for the curators, the people who prepare their talks, the brilliance of the people that work at TED. Believe it or not, I'm deeply intimidated by it. Yeah, I'm a coward. It's the age-old question. Part of the reason I put the bullet up there about just you can't be perfect is if you try to be, like, I don't know how she does it. It's like, I don't. I suck at one of them, and two of the other things are okay. They're just constant trade-offs. I do still think we get the short end of the stick, and the majority of those types of responsibilities fall on women. As a result, we certainly become more efficient, and we become good at it. But it's a series of trade-offs, by far. I think there are career decisions that I have made because I was worried about how it would impact my family. And those are going to be things that you think will impact your trajectory. But I can tell you, even having done that, I've still made it to the place that I'm at by being true to myself, finding circumstances that make me feel comfortable, finding bosses that believe in me, and then finding a good support network of people that can help you. If you live near family, you're gonna have to pay people to take care of your kid. There are gonna be things that are gonna be uncomfortable, but let me just tell you right now, my son's 18 years old. I have a 16 and an 18-year-old. And when my son was applying to college, he had to fill out a form for his college advisor, not to be shared with the colleges, but for the college advisor to get to know him and ask him who he was as a person. And he wrote down that I was his best friend. I'm gonna start crying just talking about it. I wasn't home. I worked all the time and I traveled all the time. I think them seeing you work, the pride that he had in knowing that his mom worked at an interesting place, sharing what I learned with him from my work, and then making sure that the time that I had with him was incredibly quality with the phone down. These are the kinds of things that you'll have to do. There is no simple answer to this. I wish I had a better one for you. I'm going to answer your first question, and I'm going to ask you to clarify your second one in a second. There is no hard line. Everybody here needs to understand black and white is a farce. You have to get very comfortable with gray. Let me tell you the dilemmas that I was faced with weekly. All the companies that I'd mentioned to you, they fell into my lap, and it was my decision. Do we work with them? I worked with an ideologically rigid group of very young people at TED. God love them. I also fund their paycheck, and I fund the good work that we do in educating the world and providing these talks as a nonprofit. So while it's not clear exactly, there's no exact line, the things that I had to deal with were, you may not behave well. You may have a bit of a reputation as a company, but you yourself found your way to TED, which means you may want to be better. So should I withhold what we have to offer to you? Should I say you don't have access to this and I won't allow you to learn from our organization? Or should I do this deal? And like I mentioned to you before, I could never have done this job when I was younger because I didn't have the capacity to read the room. I just couldn't read intention. And there are many, 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 many companies that want to whitewash and greenwash, trust me. But you can tell when there is an actual intention to learn. You can tell when people are desperate or hungry to learn differently or to change a culture. You read sincerity differently. And so these moral dilemmas, fortunately, are, I would say, more heavily weighted to more senior roles by design, because it does take time for you to understand how to read intention in order to make those decisions. But the most important thing that you need to understand is there are very few hard lines in life. There are some for sure, and everyone has their own set of hard lines. There aren't that many in business. But if you could clarify your second question.
I mean, you can answer that, but I think the fact that you're asking that question is phenomenal. I mean, I don't think there's an answer, but I think we need to start asking those kind of questions.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to try to answer it.
Such an easy question. It's a great question, and we literally were talking about this at dinner. I think our form of capitalism and profit making make it incredibly difficult to do just that. But what I will say is that there are things and behaviors that can change, and that we didn't wear seatbelts and we wear them now. I worked on a trading floor where I wasn't allowed to wear pants, and now there are women that are MDs running trading floors. Things can change, and I'm grateful that most young people have more social consciousness to contribute to that change. It's a difficult path forward, there's no doubt about it. The Milton Friedman point of view, which is shareholder profit is the only God, makes it incredibly difficult to navigate that. But I still have hope, and I think it's important that when you take a job, and we are finding that people are now being more thoughtful about the jobs that they take based on the morals and the ideals of the companies that they work for. These are choices that you can make, not only in your own consumption and the consumer choices that you make, but also the places that you work. And so those are ways in which you can do that as an individual, and you can contribute to that dialogue inside of the company. That being said, I think it's a very rough road.
I know that there are more questions, but we only have about 5 minutes, and I wanted Lisa to have the opportunity to ask you all a question. Would you like to take that opportunity?
I would love to take that opportunity. When I graduated from Berkeley 30 years ago, there were, as I mentioned to you, there was kind of more career scaffolding that was available to me. You're either a doctor or a lawyer, a consultant, a banker, an engineer, consumer packet marketing. There were kind of understood paths. And you guys are in a world where the path is about as ambiguous as it comes. How do you feel hopeful or more scared at the vastness and the kind of lack of definition in careers and career choices that you have? So hopeful, it seems.
keep on going, but I am going to post our basically our quiz so people can give feedback while you're doing that. I'll let this conversation keep going though.
Okay. Okay, so with the varying job descriptions, I would say that are out there, for me, it's kind of scary because it's like you have to find new parts. It's not just like a framework that was there, okay, the doctors, the nurses, the politicians.
I realize that I posted that and that means everybody's going to leave, but let's just, first of all, we can continue this, but a big round of applause.
Okay, so it's not like this framework where everybody has to fit themselves in, but you have to navigate new paths and how to merge those frameworks with these new technologies that are coming up to define, like to serve as game changers. It's kind of scary maybe sometimes. What if the technology is going so fast and I'm not there yet? What if I'm left behind? What if, I mean, ups and downs with imposter syndrome, but like, yeah, I'm positive that somewhere, somehow, I'm going to figure it out.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
I'm going to invite you all to come on up to the stage to ask Lisa if that's okay. I'm not sure how much time you have. Thank you. Actually, thank you all for your steady participation and your questions. You're phenomenal. Give yourselves a hand.